The galaxy was vast, and the Galactic Union believed it knew its measure. It charted the stars, catalogued the species, and assigned each a place in its grand hierarchy. Near the fringes, far from the civilized cores, lay a sector claimed by a species known as humans. They were, the Union consensus held, volatile, emotional, and fragmented. Amusingly complex in their internal squabbles, but utterly insignificant on the galactic stage. Their technology was conventional, their fleets disjointed. They were traders, minor diplomats, engineers of decent quality, but nothing that warranted serious attention. They were permitted to exist, a curiosity, perhaps a resource to be exploited later. The Union laughed at their pleas for fair representation, their warnings about unchecked expansion, their naive belief in universal rights. They were children playing at galactic citizenship. Admiral Vreth of the Kthar hegemony, a senior member state of the Union, often used human tactical simulations for cadet training. They were simple, predictable, relying on brute force and outdated formations. His cadets always won, dismantling the simulated human fleets with contemptuous ease. They understand passion, not physics, he would often quip to his officers, the sentiment echoing across Union space. The humans had settled worlds, built stations, expanded slowly and without aggression, but also without the unified, cold efficiency the Union valued. They seemed perpetually distracted by their own internal affairs, a chaotic mess of nations and ideologies. They were no threat. A minor irritant, perhaps, to be managed. Then came the Proxima incident. Humanity had established a thriving colony on Proxima Centauri b, a vibrant world rich in unique biological resources the Kthar desired. The Union's expansion directorate, without debate, simply allocated the world to the hegemony. Human representatives protested in the Union Senate. Their pleas were met with silence, then patronizing dismissal. Admiral Vreth was dispatched with a modest task force. The mandate was clear: secure the planet, remove the human presence. No prolonged conflict was anticipated. A show of force would suffice. Humans, the intelligence reports insisted, would fold quickly when faced with true power. They valued their lives above all else. The human colony world was vibrant, green-blue, pulsing with life. Admiral Vreth's fleet arrived in orbit, cloaked initially, observing. Millions of humans lived there, unaware. The Admiral received his final orders. The resource extraction protocols were incompatible with large-scale biological preservation. A clear zone was required. A large one. The Union's vast, cold bureaucracy had made a calculation. The cost of relocation, of negotiation, of preserving human life and infrastructure, exceeded the cost of simply clearing the area. It was a matter of credits and logistical efficiency, nothing more. Humanity had been deemed a negligible factor in the equation. Admiral Vreth gave the order. Union planetary bombardment platforms, instruments of precise, overwhelming destruction, targeted the major population centers. Not a military action, but a planetary culling. There were no pitched battles, no grand fleet engagements. Just fire from orbit, raining down on cities, on farms, on startled, fleeing civilians. The human orbital defenses, limited and outmoded, were silenced in minutes. Their small defense fleet was annihilated before it could even scatter. The attack was swift, brutal, and utterly without mercy. It lasted only a few hours. By the time the Union ground forces landed to begin securing the resources, Proxima Centauri b was a charnel house, its surface scarred, its atmosphere choked with dust and smoke. Millions died. The Union recorded it as a successful resource acquisition, minimal resistance encountered. A footnote in the sector reports. One human ship, a freighter named the Voyager, was leaving orbit on a routine supply run when the attack began. It was slow, unarmed. It witnessed the horror from a distance, the sudden infernos, the twinkling lights of cities winking out, the silent, desperate transmissions that filled the comms channels before they too fell silent. The crew watched, helpless, broadcasting frantic, ignored distress calls. They saw the Union ships, stark and terrible against the planet's burning horizon. They saw the Cthar hegemony's crest on the hulls. They saw the end of a world. And then, they ran. They turned their inadequate engines towards home, towards Earth, carrying nothing but the memory of fire and death and the cold, calculating indifference of the Galactic Union. They were the only witnesses. News reached Earth and the scattered human systems. First disbelief, then a wave of profound shock and grief. Proxima B was a symbol, a home to millions. Now it was gone. A smoking ruin. The Union's official statement was brief, clinical. Resource acquisition. Necessary measures taken. Human casualties regrettable but unavoidable due to non-compliance with relocation protocols. Non-compliance. The humans had barely been given hours, let alone weeks for relocation. It was a lie, thin and transparent. The initial reaction was chaos. Outrage, despair, calls for vengeance mixed with desperate pleas for Union justice. Human leaders appealed to the Union Senate, presenting the Voyager's logs, the eyewitness testimony. They detailed the unprovoked slaughter, the targeting of civilians, the sheer disproportionate violence. The Union listened, or appeared to. Weeks turned into months. Committees were formed, investigations promised. But the tone never shifted. The Union powers saw it not as a crime, but as a regrettable administrative issue, perhaps an overzealous local commander, but ultimately justified by the need for resources and the humans' inconvenient presence. Admiral Vreth received a commendation for efficiency. Justice did not come. Condemnation did not come. Apologies certainly did not come. Instead came the slow, grinding realization that the Union did not see humans as equals, not even as beings deserving of basic protection when Union interests were involved. They were pests. They were inconvenient. Their lives held no weight in the grand calculus of galactic power. The galaxy had laughed at their weakness, dismissed their value. Now, they had shown the depth of their contempt. Across human space, the initial noise of protest died down. A silence descended, heavy and absolute. Not the silence of surrender, but the quiet of a wound too deep for cries, of a rage too cold for shouting. The political squabbles, the national divisions that had so amused the Union, evaporated. Facing an external void where justice should have been, humanity turned inward. A single, terrible understanding settled over their disparate worlds: they were alone. Their safety, their future, would not be granted. It would have to be taken. The decision was not made in public forums, not debated in parliaments. It was a collective, silent assent that rippled through the human psyche, driven by the shared memory of fire on a distant world. They would remember Proxima B. They would remember the laughter. They would remember the silence from the Union. And they would ensure it never happened again. The vow was etched not in stone, but in the hardening of their hearts. Humanity withdrew. Not physically, not at first. They remained in their systems, continued their trade, maintained their minimal diplomatic presence. But they pulled back from the galactic stage. Their fleets stopped exercising in visible lanes. Their deep space exploration probes went silent. Their communications became encrypted, layered, impenetrable. The Union noticed their increased isolation but interpreted it as wounded pride, a species licking its self-inflicted wounds. Let them pout, was the general sentiment. Their absence made things simpler anyway. Meanwhile, deep within human systems, hidden in the asteroid belts, beneath the oceans of forgotten worlds, within hollowed-out moons, something fundamental shifted. The brightest minds, the most hardened engineers, the most visionary scientists were redirected. Resources were allocated on a scale never before seen, single-mindedly, ruthlessly. Society restructured, not under a tyrant, but under the silent, terrible purpose born of shared trauma. The arts became somber, filled with elegy and steel. Education focused on physics, engineering, strategy, and the cold, hard lessons of survival in a hostile universe. Children learned about Proxima b before they learned to read. They pursued not just conventional advancement, but understanding at a deeper level. They looked into the forbidden, the theoretical, the edges of reality. They examined the artifacts left by long-dead species, not for treasure, but for knowledge. They delved into the nature of space itself, of energy, of existence beyond 3 dimensions. They spoke of the seventh, a theoretical state, a layer of reality where the conventional laws of physics bent, where cause and effect were fluid, where power existed in forms the Union couldn't conceive. It was dangerous, theoretical, bordering on myth, but driven by desperation and rage, they pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Generations passed, though the Union only noted a decade or 2 of human sulking. To the galaxy, humanity was static, diminished. Some fringe reports spoke of strange energy signatures in human space, of ships seen maneuvering with impossible speed or appearing and disappearing without trace, but these were dismissed as censor ghosts or pirate activity. The Union, comfortable in its power and arrogance, did not probe deeper. They had forgotten the humans. They were busy managing their vast empire, dealing with squabbles between member states, comfortable in their perceived dominance. Within human space, the silent preparation reached its crescendo. The fleets built were unlike anything the Union could imagine. Not just bigger, but fundamentally different. Ships that didn't so much travel as exist where they needed to be. Weapons that didn't just destroy matter, but unmade the very bonds that held it together. Defenses that didn't just absorb or deflect energy, but simply weren't there for the energy to interact with. And at the heart of it all was the understanding gained from peering into the seventh, the controlled application of principles that bordered on the divine. The cost of this power was immense, not just in resources, but in spirit. The grim purpose had forged a new humanity, focused, efficient, and terrifyingly cold. The capacity for joy, for frivolousness, had been burned away in the fires of Proxima b and the long, silent vigil of preparation. Leaders emerged, not through charisma, but through grim competence and an unshakable commitment to the vow. Admiral Eris Thorne, a survivor who had lost his family on Proxima b, became the quiet, stoic face of this new resolve. He spoke little, but his presence resonated with the collective trauma and the chilling determination forged in the hidden war. The time came. 20 standard years had passed since the Proxima incident. 20 years of silence from humanity. The Union had almost entirely forgotten the affair, a minor unpleasantness long buried under layers of bureaucracy. Admiral Vreth had retired, celebrated for his decisive action that secured valuable resources. The Kthar hegemony prospered, fueled in part by the mines on Proxima b. The galaxy was stable, ordered by the Union's unchallenged might. The re-emergence was not announced. It simply was. The first sign was the disappearance of the Union's Fifth Fleet, patrolling near a neutral sector border far from human space. One moment they were there, a formidable force of battleships, cruisers, and escort craft. The next, they were gone. No distress call, no energy signatures, no debris. Just absence. Union command was baffled. Pirates. A rogue black hole. Investigations were launched, probes dispatched. They found nothing. It was as if the fleet had never existed. Then came the second sign. A major Union deep space construction yard, building new dreadnoughts for the hegemony, was attacked. Not by ships detected entering the system, but by weapons that seemed to appear within the yard itself. Vital nodes imploded. Primary power conduits vaporized. The yard's defense grid simply failed to activate against targets it couldn't perceive or track. When Union reinforcements arrived hours later, the construction yard was a twisted wreck, its half-built dreadnoughts reduced to slag. Scattered across the wreckage were small, inert projectiles made of an unknown material, radiating null energy. There were no human ships detected, no signatures left behind. Panic began to stir in the Union command centers. This was not pirates. This was calculated, precise, and impossible. Their sensors, their tracking systems, the very physics their technology was based upon, seemed incapable of detecting the attacker until the damage was done. Intelligence reports, previously dismissed, about strange sightings in human space were hastily reviewed, their significance suddenly terrifyingly clear. The third strike removed all doubt. It targeted the Cthar hegemony's orbital defense network around their capital world, Cthar Prime. This was a layered, ancient system, considered impregnable, capable of swatting aside entire invasion fleets. Its core nodes, however, were physically isolated, linked by FTL jump points accessible only through specific, heavily guarded coordinates. One moment, the network was active, its energy shields glowing with contained power, its weapon platforms tracking phantom threats. The next, critical nodes across the system simultaneously vanished. Not exploded, not destroyed. Simply gone. Space where a defense platform had been was empty. The resulting cascade failure crippled the entire network. Seconds later, a single, massive ship materialized in high orbit above Cthar Prime. It was unlike any vessel the Union had ever recorded. Sleek, obsidian, and utterly silent on all conventional channels. It possessed no visible weapon emplacements, no engines radiating heat or exotic particles. It simply hung there, a silent, terrible judgment against the vibrant, terrified world below. Its presence radiated a localized null field that disrupted sensors and communications for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. On its hull, etched in stark, minimalist lines, was a symbol the galaxy had forgotten, the stylized circle of Earth, bisected by an ascending arrow. It was the human flagship, the Nemesis. And its arrival was the signal. Across the galaxy, in carefully selected systems crucial to the Cthar hegemony and the Union powers most complicit in the Proxima incident, other ships of the new human fleet emerged from somewhere. They didn't use jump gates or conventional warp drives. They simply transitioned into reality at their destinations, as if stepping through an invisible door. Their targets were military strongholds, key logistics hubs, and systems vital to the enemy's command and control structure. The battles that followed were not battles in the traditional sense. They were executions. Union fleets scrambled to respond, their formations solid, their intent clear. They would overwhelm the presumptuous humans with superior numbers, with established tactics that had won them countless wars. But their numbers meant nothing against enemies they could not see, could not target effectively. Human ships, smaller and fewer in number, weaved through Union lines with impossible agility, unaffected by gravitational fields or inertia. Their weapons fired beams of contained null energy, which didn't blast through shields but simply caused sections of enemy ships to cease existing, leaving gaping holes in their hulls, severing power cores, vaporizing weapon batteries. Union starfighters, fast and agile, found themselves outmaneuvered by human craft that moved with the impossible angles and speeds of creatures adapted to a different dimension. Projectiles seemed to pass through human shields, not by penetrating them, but because the shields momentarily shifted frequency or phase, becoming intangible. Capital ship kinetics lost velocity and dissipated as they neared the human vessels, as if space itself was resisting their passage. Energy weapons flared uselessly against hulls that absorbed or redirected the power in ways the Union's physics models declared impossible. The Union's arrogance shattered against this impossible reality. Disbelief gave way to terror. Their sophisticated battle doctrines, refined over centuries of conventional warfare, were useless. They were fighting an enemy that didn't play by the rules of the known universe. They were fighting things that came from the seventh, or carried its power. The human strategy was cold and systematic. No grand speeches, no ultimatums delivered in advance. They simply arrived, destroyed their targets with chilling efficiency, and vanished. They weren't conquering worlds, not yet. They were dismantling the enemy's capacity to wage war, piece by piece, system by system. They targeted the shipyards where new fleets were built, the fuel depots that powered their drives, the communication relays that linked their commands. It was strategic decapitation on a galactic scale. Admiral Eris Thorn remained aboard the Nemesis, a silent sentinel above Cthar Prime. He broadcast a single message, looped on all frequencies, not to the hegemony, but to the galaxy. It was the raw, unedited footage from the Voyager, showing the burning surface of Proxima Centauri b, the Union ships in orbit, the despairing, final pleas from the colony. It played over and over, a grim, silent accusation. The galaxy was forced to watch, hour after hour, the atrocity it had ignored or forgotten. The Cthar hegemony scrambled its remaining forces, desperate to destroy the Nemesis. Wave after wave of ships jumped into the Cthar Prime system. They converged on the silent human flagship, unleashing everything they had. The Nemesis didn't move. Its null field expanded, swallowing incoming fire. Ships that got too close simply ceased to be coherent vessels, their components scattering into fundamental particles. Others found their weapons phasing through the flagship's hull. The Nemesis did not fire back with overt weapons. Its defense was its offense. Its presence unraveled hostile matter. It was not a ship of war in the traditional sense, it was an instrument of reality manipulation. Witnessing the impossible defense of the Nemesis, and receiving reports of the systematic destruction of their assets across the galaxy, the Cthar hegemony fractured. Desperate leaders ordered suicidal charges. Others attempted to negotiate, sending frantic messages that were ignored. Some Cthar commanders, recalling the prophecy of a silent reckoning from ancient texts, ordered their fleets to scatter, to flee the system. The Union, witnessing the implosion of a core member state and the terrifying, unstoppable advance of the human fleets, convened emergency sessions. The arrogance was gone, replaced by abject fear. The species they had mocked, dismissed, and brutalized had returned as an existential threat. Their best fleets were being annihilated by phantom enemies. Their most secure systems were falling without a fight. Whispers of the seventh spread, of forbidden technologies, of a power born of suffering in silence. Some within the Union advocated for total war, for unleashing their own superweapons. They possessed planet killers, nova bombs, reality-distorting devices sequestered since ancient treaties banned their use. But others argued, their voices trembling, that the humans clearly possessed a mastery of physics beyond their own. What if their superweapons were simply nullified? What if unleashing them only provided the humans with new forms of energy to weaponize? The risk was too great. They didn't understand what they were fighting. Union communications grids, once the backbone of their coordinated defense, became instruments of psychological warfare against them. Human forces, seemingly everywhere at once, would briefly phase into enemy command centers, leaving behind data packets containing detailed schematics of their defenses, recordings of their panicked communications, or chillingly, lists of Cthar officials involved in the Proxima B decision, now marked for retribution. Then they would vanish, leaving the enemy to wonder who was compromised, who was next. Within Union space, worlds that had celebrated the Proxima B acquisition now lived in terror. The memory of the burning human world, broadcast ceaselessly by the Nemesis, became a mirror reflecting their own potential fate. Subject species, long oppressed by the Union, saw an opportunity. Rebellions flared, fueled by the sudden, palpable weakness of the dominant power and the terrifying example of human retribution. The Union was crumbling from within, hastened by an external force it couldn't comprehend or fight. The Union leadership, huddled in their bunker on the central planet of Unity Prime, received increasingly dire reports. Fleet losses mounted exponentially. Systems fell silent. The Cthar hegemony effectively ceased to exist as a unified entity, its remnants scattered, hunted. The human fleets, though appearing in relatively small numbers at each target, operated with perfect coordination across vast distances, striking simultaneously at vulnerable points. There was no defense, only the grim certainty of the next impossible attack. In a final, desperate gamble, the Union ordered the activation of Project Kronos, a weapon designed to create localized temporal distortion fields, capable of freezing enemy fleets or even reversing local causality. It was unstable, unpredictable, and strictly forbidden by galactic law, but they had nothing left. The primary Kronos generator was on Unity Prime itself, a massive, shielded installation deep underground. Admiral Eris Thorn, still in orbit above Cthar Prime, received word of the Kronos activation. The Union, true to form, would rather shatter reality than admit defeat to those they considered inferior. A grim, almost weary expression crossed his face, visible only to his bridge crew. "Solace," he said, his voice calm. "Initiate countermeasure Omega. Prevent temporal corruption." A voice, synthetic but possessing a strange depth, replied, "Affirmative, Admiral." Countermeasure Omega initiated. Anchors establishing dimensional stability. Anticipating localized reality shear at Unity Prime coordinates. Far across the galaxy, above Unity Prime, space didn't just twist or ripple. It tore. A blinding, multispectral event erupted, not with the violence of an explosion, but with the silent, horrific unmaking of localized reality. The Kronos generator's attempt to warp time was met by humanity's deeper understanding of temporal and dimensional physics, honed in the silence and the study of the seventh. The resulting interaction didn't just neutralize the weapon, it erased it, and the surrounding area, from existence in a way that defied conventional description. The Kronos installation, and a significant chunk of the capital continent, simply were not. The scar left behind was not a crater, but a void, a place where reality hesitated. The message to the Union was unequivocal. Their ultimate weapons were impotent. Their understanding of the universe was outdated. Humanity held the keys to forces they couldn't even perceive, let alone control. With the Kronos project neutralized and their core systems exposed, the Union leadership finally broke. They sent frantic requests for parley, for surrender, for any terms. They groveled, offering reparations, autonomy, a complete restructuring of the Union with humanity in a leading role. The species they had ignored and scorned now held their fate in its silent, terrifying hands. Admiral Eris Thorn departed Cthar Prime, leaving the silent, crippled world to contemplate the ruins of its power. The Nemesis and the other human fleets did not occupy Union worlds. They did not install puppet governments or demand tribute. They simply stopped the systematic destruction. The galaxy held its breath. What would humanity do? Would they unleash their full power, burn the Union to ash, and replace it with their own terrifying hegemony? They had the power. They had the motive. The universe waited for the final, devastating blow. Instead, the human fleets gathered. Not above Union capitals, but in empty, unclaimed systems. They ceased their attacks. The relentless, silent pressure eased. Messages were sent, not of conquest, but of terms. Simple, stark terms. The Galactic Union, as it existed, was dissolved. Its central authority dismantled. The Cthar hegemony was stripped of its core worlds and resources, reduced to a minor, fearful power. Reparations were demanded, not in credits or resources, but in knowledge. Union archives were opened, forbidden research shared, lost technologies retrieved. Humanity demanded access to the galaxy's collective understanding, everything the Union had jealously guarded. More importantly, humanity demanded a galaxy that remembered. Monuments were to be erected on every major former Union world, commemorating Proxima Centauri b and the millions lost. Historical records were to be rewritten, truthfully recounting the Union's actions and the cost of their arrogance. The galaxy would not be allowed to forget why the humans had disappeared, and why they had returned. Individual human fleets remained, patrolling former Union space, silent enforcers of the new order. They didn't interfere in the internal affairs of other species unless the terms of the dissolution were violated. They were not rulers, but guardians, or perhaps, wardens. Their presence was a constant, chilling reminder of the power that lay dormant, watching. Admiral Eris Thorn, now bearing the title of Steward of Human Space, oversaw the implementation of the terms. His face remained etched with the pain of Proxima b, but also a deep, bone-weary resolve. He had seen the cost of vengeance, the hardening it required, the loss of innocence. Humanity had become powerful, yes, but also something profoundly different, something less bright, more shadowed. The galaxy entered a new era. The old hierarchy was gone. Humanity was the undisputed dominant force, not by conquest, but by demonstrating a power so absolute, so beyond comprehension, that resistance was unthinkable. Other species, once eager to please the Union, now tread carefully around human interests, offering respect where once was scorn. But the victory was not one of celebration. Within human space, the grim purpose that had unified them began to fray at the edges. The external threat was neutralized, but the internal cost remained. Some argued for continued expansion, for establishing a human empire to prevent any future threat. Others, weary of the darkness they had embraced, advocated for isolation, for returning to a semblance of their former selves, if such a thing was even possible. Factions emerged, their debates sometimes heated, echoing the very divisions that had once made them seem weak. There was the faction that believed the power from the seventh should be fully integrated into society, used to uplift and protect all of humanity, perhaps even the galaxy. There was the faction that saw it as a necessary evil, a weapon to be kept locked away, a reminder of how close they came to losing themselves. And there were those who believed humanity had been fundamentally changed, irrevocably hardened, and that the path forward involved embracing their new nature, becoming the cold, efficient arbiters of galactic stability, even if that meant ruling through fear. Stuart Thorne watched these developments with a heavy heart. They had sought justice, achieved vengeance, secured their survival. But the price was the loss of a certain kind of light. The memory of Proxima B remained the bedrock of their identity, a wound that would never fully heal. The galaxy was silent now, where once it had laughed. Silent, and watchful. The human fleets, forged in the fires of unimaginable loss and armed with the power of the incomprehensible, patrolled the void. They were the quiet masters of a new age, a testament to the terrible strength that could be born from the ashes of underestimation and the cold, hard vow to remember. The old laughter was gone, replaced by a profound, pervasive silence. A silence that reminded the stars, every single moment, why humanity had come from the seventh. And why they would never be ignored again. The memory was the weapon, and the power was the absolute guarantee that no one would ever forget. The universe had learned, through fire and unmaking, that some species were best left undisturbed, especially when they were silent. The silence was the warning. The return was the consequence. And the future was a vast, unknown expanse, shadowed by the Obsidian Fleet and the burden of a terrible, righteous vengeance.